Hello everyone and welcome to Art Salon. I'm Ellie Shore. I'm very, very happy to welcome you all to Art Salon and to welcome our speaker tonight, Judy Polstra. I have a memory of the first time that I saw Judy's work, which was long before I met her. And it was at the Boca Raton Museum. We used to have the All Florida exhibitions that were juried exhibitions for the state of Florida. And there was an amazing sculpture that was a mannequin, kind of life-sized, head and body, and there were hundreds of belts thrown around the base of it. The body of the mannequin was covered in vintage jewelry, as I remember it. And then there were all of these belts. And when you got up close and you looked at it and you read the description, the wall label, it talked about child abuse and asked people to bring in their own belts to add to this array that was this memorial to people who had been abused. And it was so incredibly powerful and incredibly moving, and I thought, you know, who did this? And of course, over the years, I've gotten to know who did that, and that's Judy Polstra. She was making many different kinds of very powerful, very hard-hitting, and yet at the same time very beautiful sculptures out of found materials, many of them jewels, costume jewelry from another era. And they touched on all kinds of very personal issues that touch people and touch our lives. She has since switched to embroidery. She's still using vintage materials now that are vintage fabrics, often gifted to her by other people. And some of them are light and fun and based on fashion and women's magazines and all kinds of fun topical images. But some of them are really hard hitting. And they are always attention-getting, conversation-starting, thought-provoking, and highly creative and original. So that's my introduction to Judy Polstra, and now I introduce Judy Polstra, who will tell you more. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. That's interesting that you remembered that. She remembered that at Boca. Actually, they were covered with jewelry and doll dresses from my childhood. And it was called Mixed Memories because I have mixed memories of a lot of positive memories and a lot of not so positive memories. And so that piece invited people to add belts to show that child abuse victims are not alone. So it was kind of like a statement piece. So that was at the Boca, all Florida, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, something like that. Okay, anyhow. I called this What Remains is because, like I said, I'm for the most part a self-taught artist. And I really didn't take art seriously till much later in my life. I was born in 1965 in White Sands, New Mexico on a naval base. And if you've never been to New Mexico, I can't recommend it enough. I was born near Trinity Site, which is the site of the first atomic bomb. I was born to one of 2 identical twins. This is my Aunt Judy, for whom I'm named, and Joyce. My mom died 18 years ago. Judy is still alive. Both are artists. Judy is still painting and drawing in Kansas. And my mother was a seamstress and an oil painter. So I grew up surrounded by fabric and fashion and other arts. That's me, wearing this little dress that my that my great-grandmother crocheted. So 1965. But the point of this is I was surrounded by embroidery and crochet and fabric my whole life. As I got older, we moved to North Canton, famous for the Hoover Company. If you've heard of the Hoover vacuum, that's where that's from. And here's my mother, and I'm the oldest of 4 siblings. This was in Ohio. It was probably about 5 or 7. New Year's Eve, evidently. like I said, my mother was an artist, and I drew and painted my whole life. And I think I was 7 years old. I got first place in a poster contest or some drawing when I was 7. And I loved to draw, and my other passion was the piano, so I grew up with music and art. These are some embroideries I did, but I think they call it crewel now. This was with yarn. I was about 7 or 8 years old. And as I got older, I went to Bowling Green State University, but I was not allowed to get that liberal arts degree. I was not allowed to get any arts degree. My parents pushed me into business, it's actually been a blessing and a curse. What I ended up doing was going into fashion merchandising and design and marketing. So that got me out of some of the economic courses and calculus courses that I didn't want to take for business, but also kept me in design and fashion, which has been a passion of mine my whole life. And I've had some interesting jobs along the way, like for example, now I'm a safety compliance officer for a commercial air conditioning contractor. That's what I do in my day job, but I'm an artist in my other life. At Bowling Green, I studied fashion, and I didn't really pay much attention or give much focus to my arts until it was when my mother died, and both of my grandmothers about the same time. It was within the same 2 years, which was about 20 years ago. And I inherited vast quantities of costume jewelry and buttons and beads and all kinds of things that nobody wanted. And at the time, I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but I just couldn't let them go. I had a leftover mannequin, and one night I was kind of playing, I was looking at all this jewelry, and it just was serendipity that the mannequin was there, and I started laying out pieces on this mannequin. And this was the result of my first creation. I also have a passion for lucite. I love carved lucite. But all of these are, for example, that's from a sewing machine that my mom was an extra sewing machine, what do you call, pad or template? Footplate, yes, footplate. And all of these were inherited beads and buttons. And she's one of those, I knew where she was now, but she sold a long time ago. This is called Judy's biological clock. My grandmother made these beaded hanging planters, and I cut them all apart, and these are all the beads from her hanging planters. And that's the full view of that. And this right now is in a competition. I'm in the final 10 it's a billboard competition in LA. And it's the final 10, so I'm supposed to know like the top around December 12th. So what they wanted was something that was just something unique, something eye-catching. So I'm happy to know that I'm in the finalists. But these, I probably shouldn't have done this either. These are my grandfather's pocket watches that I put on her breast. And this is called Judy's biological clock. This is another piece called Beautiful Servant. He's in the permanent collection at the Kinsey Institute in Bloomington, Indiana. For years he greeted guests at the gift shop. This is a piece called The Heart of New Orleans. In addition to buttons and jewelry, I inherited a lot of game pieces. I don't know if you all grew up with games, but we had so many games. And I took apart the games, and there's a chunky candy bar head, and at his heart is at the heart of New Orleans. He's called the Player, dying to be beautiful. This was one of those a little bit darker pieces. She's got a watch in the back of her hand, a stopwatch, and that was, at the time, I was influenced by eating disorders and my eating disorder, that you're just, you're trying to be, just dying to be beautiful. And so that's what that was about. Then, like Ellie said, I have some lighter works. This was called Showgirl. She was published in a coffee table book. I could have brought a copy. World's Greatest Erotic Art. So she was just a playful piece that I did. These were discs from roofs. If you ever go by a construction site, I collected these on the ground, and the rest of these are all inherited buttons, beads, jewelry, watches again. You're too sensitive. This is something I've been told all my life. I don't know if you all know Francie Bishop Good. She did a critique at this, and what did she say? It was a cosmic wink to the universe. Anyways, it was a cute comment. But all of these are Cracker Jack toys, right here. Inherited buttons. This is an old dental plate. And then a friend of mine is a dentist, and these are artificial teeth. I guess a while ago at the time, if you had he had to get teeth removed. They had to do more than one, or perhaps the whole mouth. I don't know, but he had all of these leftover artificial teeth. So that's what he's covered with, teeth and jewelry. I love the juxtaposition of the gross with the beautiful. And this was my mother's necklace. Love a housewife. Just kind of a wink right there. A dental plate. Still waiting. One of those, I battled depression my whole life, and this is one of those times where it's still waiting, like you're waiting for something to happen. This is an antique clock. This is in Australia right now, permanent home. This is a piece I tried, I didn't get in, but it was just fun with, they had a Coconut Grove poster contest, Deco Girl. These are collectible spoons that my mother had, and various copper pieces. Coming into my own, this is one of my favorite. This is one I won't part with. This is in my house right now. This is covered with both my grandmother's and my mother's vintage brooches. And again, the lucite, carved lucite knobs. And these brooches, it kills me now because I see them on eBay they're so expensive. A little more detail. This is the piece that Ellie mentioned, and these are the only full-size pieces I've ever done. These were, okay, there's a dental plate there, there's a prosthetic eye, and these right here, they were tips from the glue tubes that I was using, just using anything to create the breath. And there was a reporter, I did an interview a long time ago, and they wondered why I never documented how my design is. And with these, I never had a plan. This was always what I would do. I would lay out the mannequin, and that's what happened the very first time I did it, and spread out the jewelry and the buttons, and then just start placing them and see what I liked and moving them around. And that's how they progressed. This was at a show in Miami for, I think, a Heineken. Beck's, that's my husband. Beck's beer, yep, that's correct. This is the piece that Ellie was talking about. There it is, there's a shot at the Boca Museum. And this is called Mixed Memories. And her face is white, it's ghostly white, as she thinks back to memories of child abuse. Like I said, all of these are doll dresses that me and my sisters had. And I covered each of those with resin to give them the shape. And there's dolls and jewelry, like Ellie said, there's a Barbie in the center, and then all of the belts. It was really, I was surprised. There were several people that brought several belts and told me their stories. It was really quite powerful. She has to be the center of attention. This was a funny one. It was a lighter one. These are all vintage cake toppers. She is also about waist size. This was a lamp from my childhood, an egg lamp. You can get to see. This was my mother's beaded collar she had on a sweater, and all of these are vintage cake toppers. She was just finished a show in Belgium, and that says vote for your favorite. So I got such a kick at that my work was promoted. Vote for your favorite. It was an assemblage and collage show in Belgium. Or that was a kick. Oh, then we move on to a couple installations. The system, this was about immigration and any systems that leave people in the dust, whether it's migration or corporations or people, migration. Oh, this is the middle-aged 40-pound swing. This was a fat suit right here. It's 40 pounds on a childhood swing, and that was my own struggle with weight. Chairs. I also decorated chairs. This was all red buttons, Bakelite. This was in an ad for an architectural and design trade magazine for Bentley Prince Street Carpet Company I used to work for, but that was an architectural digest and trade magazines around the world. Joanne Nava has that chair, any of you that know Joanne. Yep. Bakelite strips and a snake brooch. Pearl button chairs. My mother had tons of pearl buttons and some more of those roofing discs as well. That was insulation on a spray. I was just experimenting. Spray insulation, if any of you do any home improvement. Armor against the aging process, leather and watches. Watches again, actually these were gifted to me. A friend of mine's father collected watches, and they weren't expensive watches, but watch faces. And then that's the armor suit, armor against the aging process. After I finished doing assemblages and installations for a while, I took some time off and I taught piano. This is one of my favorite pictures. To me, it looks like a Norman Rockwell picture. Look at this little girl pointing at her. She doesn't want to play, and this one's practicing. Anyhow, hand embroidery. Do you know Mr. Bean, everybody? Yeah. So for a while, after I did the assemblages and the installations, I focused on my piano. I kind of fell away from art again. It's kind of been my whole life. I get into it and then I fall away. I get in, and whether I'm with piano or for a while, it was all about the job, and I wanted to make money, and so I got away from my art. What was it? Just less than 3 years ago, I was cleaning out the garage, and I found my mother's stash of embroidery threads that I hadn't touched in years. And in addition to that, these stashes of vintage textiles that, again, I hadn't touched because I was doing something else. I was doing the mannequins, and I wasn't interested in, that wasn't where I was. And I got all these abandoned textiles, and then V gave me some gloves. People give me things, and these beautiful yarns, and Bonnie, didn't you give me this Viking ship? Yeah. Yeah. This is my largest piece to date, called Confessions, Parables, and Lessons I've Learned. And that was one of the first times Ellie and I started talking about doing some work together. This right now is at a gallery in Chicago. The theme is trauma and survivors, so I'm really, really happy that it's been there. But it's been to Delray and Indiana University. For some reason, I keep ending up back in Indiana. This was taken at Delray, and it is my true confessions. It deals with promiscuity, alcoholism, weight gain, weight loss, anything that's... Anyways, then I also worked on some vintage undergarments that my grandmother and my parents, my mother and grandmothers had all this stuff, and nobody wanted it. And at the time, I never knew that I'd be embroidering it, but when they died, I just couldn't bear to give it away. That says, love me because I'm fabulous, not because I'm a bitch. Juried in and censored out more times than I can count. Oh my goodness sakes, this bra and these boxers, oh my goodness. Anyhow, that's my model, Gigi. Okay, and then we got a new president, and suddenly I found myself more political than I've ever been. This is my grandmother's vintage slip. It says a woman's place is in the House and in the Senate, and then I added, and in the White House. That's at FAU right now, in the hand and I. RBG. She has the original, and I've actually put these on handbags and tote bags. We must persevere. This was in a vote, silence during the assault, silence again during the U.S. Senate. That was during Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's testimony. We have become grotesque. Another vintage textile that just happened to be disintegrating, and it just seemed perfect. It really was inspired by a long layover at the Atlanta airport. If you've ever spent a lot of time in the airport and people are laying on the ground, and never again. This is in New York right now. All vintage textiles that were given, that I've either inherited or were given to me. This is called Fleeting. It's actually pretty big. I almost brought it to show today. But it's on an old easel, again, that I inherited. And here are my mother's earrings, my grandfather's pens. It's like my little idol, not idol. Vignette shrine, yes. Yes, to Fleeting to loved ones who have passed. And it's in my studio. What I loved about it is this is beautiful textile, and it is disintegrating, and it is stained. And I thought it was beautiful. That's a brooch. with the glass eye. It's like an inch in diameter. That was a fun one. The beads. Real glass eye, antique glass eye. I guess I have a thing for eyes. I didn't realize it. That's my homage to Louise Bourgeois. Oh, this is hard for me. This is a friend of mine bought this. I went to high school with her. And I don't know why I did the one breast like this. It just was holding hands. And she bought it. And we went to high school together. And she died of breast cancer, like 2 months after she bought it. She posted on Facebook. I'm from Ohio, and down here, and we still maintained our friendship. And she said, we weren't really that close in high school. And it's like, oh, Judy, I have to buy it. And then she died 2 months later. So she just said that piece really spoke to her, and I didn't know why. So that's Michelle. This I got a grant in Chicago for this piece. It was a $500 grant. Ryan Ling. It was for bipolar disorder. Anyhow, so there was if you had any kind of mental diagnosis, you could apply, and they had a really nice show. Dale Chihuly, there were several other named artists in it, but anyhow, this piece got me a grant. That's on my grandmother's salt bag. I don't know if you can see that old. That's it. There it is. You didn't have to think about it. Karma. This is an Ellie show. Strings are always attached. It's in a hinged frame, and the strings can spill out too, so you can display it either in the box like this or. Oh. How many of you know Randy Rainbow? Randy! That was last December. I did a portrait of him, an embroidered portrait. So I love Randy. This was getting back to, so I've only been embroidering for not even 3 years, back to embroidery for less than 3 years. So it was about a year and getting all my heavy emotions out in politics and depression and angst. And then I just got tired of it. And so then I went back to, I have all these patterns that my mom had when she was sewing and pattern books. And so a lot of these were inspiration from old pattern books. So this is also in the B&L. I've decided this year I'm going to really keep track of how many hours I put into a piece, because this took 4 months, and mostly I don't usually embroider on the weekend, but during the week, well, it depends. I would say maybe 35 hours in a week times 4, so there's 140 times 4 months, 285, 6. I mean, it's a long, 20 by 16, I think is what it is. But you can see that's another vintage textile that my grandmother had. And I had a lot of fun playing with shading, and anyhow, that's called She Is Me. This one you showed, and this was, if I could say, my favorite. This was just me playing with color. It's called Gossip Girls. It's from an old black and white photograph that I found on the internet of these women posed like that. And I just thought it was wonderful, and just playing with color. I did 10 this size. 8 will be in your show. This is Flapper Girls. This was the first time I started using single threads. A lot of the threads I've used before are 2 and 3, but this is the first time single, and you get more like a pencil, almost like or ink effect. This is in New York right now. This is called Body Positive. And this one is too. That's called Sleeping Woman. But this was fun. If you know it, there's something in embroidery called red. It's just called red embroidery. I mean, that's an actual thing where all you do is red yarn. And so that was the first time I experimented with that. Woman in the Window. This is called Venetian Ball, and I really experimented with metallic threads, which if any of you've ever tried to embroider, it's not fun. Metallic threads tend to curl, and They're very difficult to work with. This was fun working with the shading and just trying to mimic what I hope was the shape of the fabric. Thank you. Fierce. More fun. See, I like leopard. Oh, Iris Apfel. There's a magazine called The Nation, and I've been published a few times this year. The first one, Threads of the Nation. Women belong in all places where decisions are being made, RBG. This is she has the original of this one. That's the one. She made it in their calendar for March. This was also published in The Nation. You saw that before. Actually, these were all CPR masks that I stitched together on a screen.
CPR masks.
Like for CPR mannequins or dummies, like you can practice and then they're replaceable. Hashtag impeachment. That's what they titled it, Moving the Impeachment Needle. And that's an old, it was an arm rest, you know, like you'd put over, you can see like this would go down the middle of the chair and then someone.
What my grandmother called an antimacassar.
That's what it is. I just learned antimacassar.
How many people know that word?
No.
Okay, I'm glad I'm not alone. My grandparents were English, so I don't know whether that's.
Well, you put it on like the armrest in the back of the chair.
They always had big stuffed chairs with antimacassar, so I know that.
How do you spell it? It's antimacassar.
Yeah, there's no T.
Anti is against something.
ANTIMAC.
CC. I think it's CC. ASER. I think. Yeah.
Antimacassar
So that the end of the word must have a meaning.
or another language?
It's a hair oil, I think. They used to put that to protect.
Oh, I think you're right.
Oh, cool.
So, I'm sorry, did they commission me? Was that your question?
Right, right.
They did for the calendar. They did for the calendar. Somehow, I don't, darn Instagram. Somehow they found me on Instagram. That's how that was. And then now they became familiar with my work and they've published it 3 times now. So, yeah, it's been nice. Well, thank you.